Good morning. Ayin Beis, we're reviewing its conclusion. We finished page 1418. We're on top of page 1419. Aleph Tov Yud Tes. And yesterday, in the last class, in the journey upward of Oisius, starting from all the way the most tangible form, which is really written letters, but he used that in the parentheses, but it's mostly spoken letters. We'll soon see why, because the spoken letter is the way God creates existence, with the spoken words, the Dvar Hashem. So from there we moved up to thought, to letters within thought. And remember, letters from the word asa, which means channels of expression, thought. So any form of expression, any gili, requires oisius, asa. Question is, what type of letters? Like you said, many levels of letters. From thought, went to two types of chesenius haseichel, primius haseichel, both in Binah and comprehension itself. And here the letters become more sublime, more subtle, to the point that you don't even feel them, you don't sense them. Then the letters within Chochma, they're in nikarim, they're not discernible, they're not yet fully shaped. Then we went from there to koiches nalomim, the concealed faculties, which is rotzen. And rotzen itself, chesenius rotzen and primius rotzen, also, now the letters are even less defined, because they're higher than kalim, because the koiches nalomim don't manifest in kalim, but they're still manifest in some way, there is expression. The outer rotzen, he said, is more mitzias. The inner rotzen is less mitzias. And then he went to Tainug. That in Tainug, even more so, because Tainug is an internal experience, as opposed to Ratzon, which is an expressive experience. Like he said, Einug hu b'chinas aliyah v'helam. And I was looking where we learned this earlier, so I looked it up. It's actually much earlier, in volume 1 and volume 2. The chapters are chapter 202 and chapter 349, if you want to look it up. Difference between Ratzon and Tainug. Okay. And that's where the Oisius Sham is built in the Korin Klal in Tainug. Now, what about the Etzem HaNefesh? Because ultimately, we want to connect and interface with the highest level. Till now, we got to Tainug. So the letters are originating in Tainug. So he says, no. The letters really originate and are embedded in Etzem HaNefesh. And that was the second half of the page, on page 1418, that we learned in the previous class. So let's sum up what we learned there. So what do we have? We have like this. Middle of the page, he says, there are letters that are embedded in the Etzem HaNefesh itself. Now, we explained Etzem HaNefesh really means the soul, before we define it as a soul that has within it faculties. Remember, the faculties, let's say the power to see, the power to conceive of ideas, the power to feel, all of them come from a nefesh. If you don't have a soul, you don't have faculties. They're not just independent faculties that come from nowhere. So it's the nefesh, the living soul within a person. A body is just a container, just a vehicle. So the body without a soul is lifeless, God forbid, a corpse. So it may have all the kalim you need. The eyes are there, the ears are there, the brain is there, the heart is there, everything is there, but it's not functioning because it's only a keli without an ur. What is the ur? The urs are 10 general faculties which originate from the source, which is the Etzem HaNefesh. Okay. Now here, just for the record, he says Etzem HaNefesh, we're not necessarily talking about Etzem HaNeshama now, like when we see this Nefesh. He's talking about the core Nefesh, in contrast to the revelations from the Nefesh, to the expressions of the Nefesh. The question now is this: does the Nefesh have the power to express itself? Because you could argue, like we're going to go through now the argument, that expression comes with the Giluyim, with the things that emanate. But let's take, for example, the sun. He gave the example of sun before. The sun, it's not just the sunlight that expresses, the sun has the power to express itself. And therefore, it turns into light. The sun expressing itself is the sunlight that emerges from it. Just like we say a human being, if we didn't have the power of expression at all, we wouldn't speak. we wouldn't in any way communicate. We may not even express ourselves express ourselves even to ourselves, but we have the power to express ourselves. How we express ourselves, that's the difference between Maisem, Dibur, Machshava, Binah, Chochma, Ratzon, Tainuk. But the very act of Asius, where is that rooted? So he makes it very clear it's embedded in the Etzem HaNefesh, in the very Nefesh itself. And it doesn't originate in the step below the Nefesh, meaning in the Giluyim of the Nefesh. And in the case that he makes for it now, yes, was pointed out in a Geras HaKedesh 5, Vayaz David Sham. He talks about it as well. It's worthwhile looking there because he does give more details in understanding the process. Because what you have is like this. There's the power of expression in the soul. Then there's the actual expression. Obviously, if, for example, speech, if we didn't have the 5 articulators, as we've determined is what they're called, 5 powers of articulation, namely the mouth, the lips, the teeth, the palate, the tongue, and the throat, we wouldn't be able to pronounce letters. You may think of an idea, but if your mouth isn't working, those 5 so-called articulators, like I gave the example of the instrument, the letters won't be channeled into actual, tangible, and coherent words or letters. But that's not where they originate from. That just gives them shape and form. It's just like when without breath, you also can't speak. But breath itself doesn't create a particular sound. So you need to have a general flow of the power of expression. Then these so-called instruments, if you wish, of articulation, give it Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. But where does the power of that expression come from? Those Asius, as he said, Meleya, HaNefesh Meleya Asius. The Nefesh is filled with letters, which means here it's filled with the ability to express. Now, if you open up a Nefesh, you're not going to find an Aleph and a Beis, but it originates from there, that ability and power to express itself. Even though Eina Margish Klal Sheyesh Asius B'Nefesh, even though we don't sense and we don't feel at all, but you have to say that they're Asius, because if not, where did the Asius come from? Where did the letters come from? Again, we're not talking about, like for example, I'll just take an example of a projector of white light. You're projecting light on a screen. All you see is white light. So there's nothing to see, just white light. It's pshittus. Then somebody takes a film that has shapes and forms, or letters for that matter, and you're shining the light now through the letters. So on the screen, you're going to see letters, Aleph, Beis. Now we all understand that the screen itself, that the film itself, without the light, would not have any letters. It has letters in it, but it's not going to be projected. So essentially what it's doing is it's taking the white light and channeling it into a shape of letters. That's essentially what a name does, really. So it's not creating letters, it's channeling them. But so where do the letters themselves come from? So he says that comes from the Etzem HaNefesh, Milei Esis. Now, actually, my example is not a good example in this sense because the letters don't come from the projector. The projector just gives off white light. The letters come from the film, in between the projector and the screen. So even though I use the example, I use it only for one part of it. It's actually, in this case, it's not a good example because the letters don't come from there. Here, he's saying they come from the Nefesh, because where else would they come from? Where the Esis, meaning the expression of the Keich, is coming from. It's similar, like I said yesterday, similar to the idea, the power of vision does not come from the eye. The eye is a container. It's a container that's conducive and was engineered by God to be the perfect container to allow us to see. That's why your ears are not a vehicle for sight. They're a different type of vehicle. But no one's going to say the vision was born in the eye. The vision comes from the nefesh. Then that ear from the nefesh fits into the keli called the eye, and now you're able to see. So similarly, the power of expression comes from the nefesh, then that is channeled into the keiches as the keiches emerge. So the keiches, each one has its way of expression, whether it's thought, speech, or chochma, binah, ratzon, tainuk. So let's just review the argument that he made, the case. The im nemer shemesavim ha'idei galas ha'keiches ba'metzois. If you say that the letters themselves, that expression, are formed or created by when the keiches get revealed by mitzvahs and those articulators, so then then it should take time for it to develop. It should take time how to move the nanea to so-called move the mitzvahs, these articulates, in order for them to shape into letters. And to train yourself in doing so. And the fact is, we see that it happens immediately, like that. So you have to say it's already in place, it's just not been expressed yet. So it's already there. Like anything, like to say, for example, if let's say seichel, someone would say, seichel doesn't come from the etzem hanefesh. It comes from your brain, comes from your mind when it starts thinking. Someone will say, 1 second, so that should take time until I prepare myself, until I start knowing how to use seichel. But since seichel is there in the nefesh, it only needs to be expressed, so then it could be naturally and automatically, like he says in Ageres HaKedesh in Tanya. Then he goes on. So then maybe you could argue, okay, it's not coming from the revelation of the keiches, but it's coming from the keiches themselves. The keiches themselves, let's say they are the ones that have the power of expression. And maybe it's not coming from etzem hanefesh. So he says two things. One, one second. And the mitzvahs, in this case, the mitzvahs are not the ones that are creating the expression. They're just the ones that give it substance, but it's coming from the keiches, not from the mitzvahs. In other words, the mitzvahs would be like the screen I mentioned before. He's saying, no, maybe it's coming from the faculties, but not from the nefesh. He says, so besides the fact, how can they create expression when it's not in their source, the etzem hanefesh? Where do the keiches have this power to do so? So just like the keiches come from the nefesh, the expression also does. In addition, outside of the parentheses, so then every oyed, he says, should have its set of letters, and that's that. You shouldn't be able to express an idea in more than one way. The fact that you can express it in different letters, in different words, like he brings from the Rosh, Ran, Teisrus, Rosh, and Ran, tells you that the fact is that the seichel is not the creator of these letters, because the letters come from etzem hanefesh, and then there's many ways you can explain this idea. And everyone says it in their own way, according to their nefesh. Right. So that's why you can see two different individuals will explain the same idea. Each one has their own so-called way of saying it based on their nefesh and based on their personality, if you wish. So then this leaves us to conclude that ikran, shala'esis, is be'etzem hanefesh. Ikran, he says now. Which means probably the primary source. Doesn't mean that they're not shaped and not contributed to through the other levels, but the ikr comes from the etzem hanefesh. And then he brings the proof that from a mute person can give birth to a person that speaks. Now, if the letters come from the keiches, the mute person doesn't have the koyach adibur, the power to speak. So how can he give birth? So you have to say, because it's not from the giluyim that oisias, they're coming from oisias shebe'etzem hanefesh. And then finally he says, and that's why we call a human being, when we say nefesh chaya, the Targum says, nefesh mamalolo, ruach mamalolo, a spirit that speaks. You know, speech is not some aside that happens like just one of our faculties. The spirit itself of the human being is a speaking spirit, meaning it's the nefesh has the power to express itself. Nefesh hamedaberes, due to the letters that are embedded within the nefesh. However, in the nefesh, they're not a mitzias at all. Like nothing is a mitzias. There, everything is in a state of shapelessness and formless. And that's why in yedim klal, in yeduim klal, that's why they're not at all sense. We're not aware of any letters there. because they're not in any mitzias yet. They haven't taken on any form of mitzias. And he says that's why also the etzem nefesh is not felt, because the eishis are not mitzias. Something that's not a mitzias cannot be sensed or felt, because, like we said, expression is, for us to feel it or sense it, you need some form of expression, even if it's a very sublime and subtle form. So that's a summary of what we learned yesterday. Okay, ready to continue? Page 1419. Now comes the dugma mizeh, Yuvan Lamaila. All this was talking about human faculties, all these levels. What does this teach us now, how things are Lamaila, above, by God? And again, remember, God did not need to create it this way, but he did create it this way because he wanted us to have something to help appreciate and understand how godliness works. So he starts like this. So top of page 1419, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And the example from all this that we just discussed will be understood above as follows. Sheyesh gamkin esis hadibur. There, Lamailo, there's also letters of speech. Not just the human. Ukamesha Kosav, the Pasuk says literally. By the way, the other day, we talked about whether Osa was a word from Targum. There is a Pasuk that says, V'osa meravovis kedesh, which seems to be that word Osa in a Pasuk. But as I said, it's not a Pella, because it could be a word that's somewhat Aramaic. It's still in a Pasuk, right?
The also Merivavois Kodesh, I think, is with a hey at the end.
Oh, yeah? Are you sure?
I think so.
And does it mean the same thing, or it means something else?
Fear that in the Zeis HaBrocha, right?
Yeah.
Means Hashem, you came from holiness.
You came.
You.
It's from the same word. Yeah.
You, but the word asa,
No,
you.
no, also like va'ata?
No, not like the Mishrai. You're right, it's like the Ato. But
what about asa boker v'gam laila?
also Baker is the Aleph.
Yeah, I mentioned Osa Boiker. That's the...
Also in Merivavois Kodesh, this is with a hey. Hoifia mehar poron, the also Merivavois Kodesh. Pashtas, it means the also that he came.
Here it says Loshan Arami. I see the teaching. It's Loshan Arami. So be it. Okay, it came. Fine. Yeah.
Who is saying Lashon Arami?
I know. I'm just seeing here in a translation. I don't know. I'm not sure who it is. I have to look it up. I just came to me before. I wanted to just mention. Let's continue. It's all right. Good. Okay. So yes, Gamkin Esis Hadibur Lamailo, like it says the Befedish in Apostle, B'dvar Hashem, Dvar, Shamayim Nasu, the word of God, the heavens were created. The Chain and Lamaila, there's also Yesh Esis HaMachshava. There's also letters or expression of thought. In other words, what we just learned about levels in the human, we also have a parallel to that in Lamaila. We'll soon discuss the details, but he's just establishing that. V'hagam, we say, and even though the lei machshavesai machshaveseichem, and even though your thought, God's thought, is not machshaveseichem, is not their thoughts, means human thoughts, and the Alter Rebbe actually in Tanya says, like same thing, dibur, loi diburai, ke diburchem, ke devrechem, u'kamoi kein diburi yizbarach ene ke diburenu. Same saying, the words of God, the speech of God is not like our speech, and there are many differences. In Tanya, he explains the differences between the dibur, our dibur, and God's dibur. Besides the fact that God creates with his speak, and the dibur shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu chashiv ma'aseh, as well that he says the dibur of the Eibusher is all within him, and more differences. So you're just saying there's a parallel between our speech and our thought to Hashem, but it says it's not similar. Mekol mokim dibra Torah b'loshen b'nei adam. Nevertheless, Torah speaks in the language of man, which means that be'etzem, of course, God is beyond us and different than us. But God chose to manifest through speech and through thought, with all the distinctions and the disclaimers and qualifications that God's thought and speech are not like ours. There are similarities. Again, Tanya Perek Chaf Aleph talks about that more in detail. And what is this Lashon B'nei Adam? What does it mean, Torah Dibra B'Lashon B'nei Adam? No, the Torah itself is beyond Lashon B'nei Adam. It's beyond our language. What does it mean that Torah speaks our language? It means, that's referring to the Oyer Eliki, the divine light, the energy, Sheba B'kamet Simtsumim, that comes through a number of diminishments. Ad Shu B'chinas Gili El Azulas. That's what means Dibur. It could also mean referring to Dibra Torah. Torah also speaks. But Dvar Hashem, what does it mean, Dvar Hashem? If God's speech is not like our speech, what does it mean God is speaking? So he's saying it means it's godliness manifesting through tzimtzumim to the point that it can be revealed to another. This is Mamish from Tanya, chapter 21. The Mamish says that. He says, what does Dibur Lamayla mean? The Gilir to another. Just like by us, what is speech? When I think, I'm the only one that is aware of my thoughts. When I speak, I'm revealing my thoughts to another. So Lamaila, there's also that concept. There's the Oyer Eliki that's revealed only to himself. That would be Machshava. The Oyer Eliki that's revealed to another. In other words, that would be called Dibur. That since God wanted to create worlds and creations that are separate from him, even though be'etzem they're not separate. He explains in Tanya. From God's point of view, when he speaks, even though the speech is conceptually like to another, it's only from our perspective that we are out. We feel like another because the tzimtzumim conceal God's presence. When I speak to you, it's very clear you and I are not the same person. But God has everything, encompasses all reality within it, as he explains in Tanya. But the tzimtzumim conceal, so it appears that God is speaking to us as if he is another, as if we are another from him, separate from him. In other words, to create the elemus, nifrodim, separate, shehein kamoy dover hazulas. They're like something outside, another. Now again, when from God's point of view, there's only one achdus, but the tzimtzum, which is also real, God is creating space for another. That's essentially when we say Dvar Hashem, that is, Dibra. So Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam, because be'etzem, all this language does not apply to God because he's not like us, but his manner of behavior and functioning is similar to what Dibur is by us. There's the concept of God communicating and creating another that's consciousness does not feel the divine consciousness. And that's the meaning of Dibur. Again, in Tanya, he elaborates a bit more. So what I said now is based a bit on what it says in Tanya and what he says here. So on one hand, God's Dibur is not like ours because God is all-encompassing. There's no other really. But there's another aspect that is similar because God wanted to create an existence that should feel as if it's separate and beyond and outside. And that's why we feel, and that is through Dibur. Now, had God created it all without Dibur, just Machshava, it would be miraculous. By using the word Dibur, Torah is saying Vayidaber Hashem or Vayemer Hashem or V'dvar Hashem, Torah is allowing us a handle, Dibur Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam, something to understand the process so we can relate to it and obviously connect to it, as we discussed a number of times. So again, God could not have done all of this. He could have just created existence any way he likes. He could have just, in his own, not even machshava, I want existence, and poof, there you have it all. He doesn't need all these steps. Humans need them. I can't give you instructions if I don't speak to you or write to you. We can't do anything if we don't go through these steps. You're not going to build a house because you want a house. You need to build it. The Eibishter, he wants it, then he builds it. Even will is also a faculty. But Hashem wanted it to be in a way, that's called Dibra Teira B'Lashon B'nei Adam. Not just he's speaking in our language. He's using instruments and tools that will become like our language. Remember, that language itself, God also created. Dibra B'Lashon B'nei Adam is also a creation of God's. It's a creation of God's that gives us some type of interface, like some similarity. Like let's say we say God is wise. There's Chochma of Atzilus. God is a maven, understands. God is a Baal Chesed. He does Chesed. Elim Yechesed Yibon. What does that mean? We know God is not defined by any faculty, by any attribute. Lav Mikol Midas Iu Klal. Lav Mikol Midas Inun Iu Klal. He doesn't have any midas. He doesn't have any definition. But he chose to manifest godliness, the oyed, into a keli called chesed or chachma. So we have something to relate to. And then the same time we say chakim v'lei b'chachmi yediyah. He's wise, but not with knowable wisdom as we know it. Or like he said here, he has machshava, but machshavei say le machshavei seichem. So you know both things. There's something that's in common, and then you right away qualify, but in truth, he's beyond. Famous machlek is between Maral and the Rambam. The Rambam says, Hu hamada, hu yedei, hu hayedua. He is the knowledge, he is the knower, the knowledge, and the hamada, hu yedei, yedua, and what is known, all in one. Says the Maral, the Eibishter is l'mayla medas, lav b'kol inun midas iyu klal. You can't define God by das. What do you mean he's one with das? The famous question. And the Maral answers, the Chassidus answers, that the Maral is talking about so-called etzem beyond the structure of attributes, of divine attributes. The Rambam, the Alter Rebbe, chapter 2 in Tanya, there's a Hagah, few places, 4 places in Tanya, a similar Hagah. He says, the Maral and the Rambam is talking how it's in Kalim, and it says Heidi loy chachme kabbalah Ramak and Arizal because not Silus. There is hu amada hu yedeya, but that's after God already emanated attributes, and He's one with those attributes. Hu v'chachma se'echad, hu amada hu yedeya hu yedua. So really 2 different levels, and you have to always be aware of both. But there is a level where we meet, like we learned earlier. Why do we need Atzilus? Because without Atzilus, how would we know God? God is beyond knowledge. But because God himself manifested in the power of knowledge of Yediyah and Binah and Chochma, and same thing Chesed, Mahu Chanun Afata Chanun, Mahu Rachamon Afata Racham. So now we have attributes of God that we can emulate and relate to, with the qualification that we are not God and we are not his Chesed, but we're manifesting his Chesed when we do tzedakah, when we do kindness. So this is basically, so therefore Dibur, even though Dibur of Hashem is different than our Dibur, but it's still something that we can learn from by looking at how we speak. The letters of speech and the letters of thought can help us understand how it is Lamaila. That's the gist of what he just said in this little section. I'll stop for any questions if anybody wants to clarify anything. So once we have this introduction, now we can go now and let's see how much can we figure out from our way of understanding Osius, and that will allow us to contemplate on how God uses Osius expression to create. Remember again, Atzmus is beyond expression, but as we're going to learn, Atzmus shows to express, and that's going to be Shmoi. So we'll get to that a little later. Now he's going to go through the steps of how God uses his instruments of expression, whether speech, thought, and higher than that, in the process of creation. So he says it like this now. Now this level that we're talking about, Dvar Hashem, Dibur, which is like Dover Zulas, because he created something that feels itself separate. I think it even says in some Maimorim that if God created the world with Machshava, the world would not feel separate from him. Because Machshava is not separate. Machshava is what you yourself are thinking. The fact that God used words, which like we said, Dibur, creates that idea of expressing to another, that creates that sense of otherness that we have. So he says, V'zehu, this level is bechinas chitzenius hamalchus. Where is it in the spheres? It's the outer dimension of Malchus. Just a second. He said that already earlier. Dvar Hashem Shemayim bechinas Malchus. Yeah. The outer dimension of Malchus, Hanikra Dibur Elyon. That's called Dibur Elyon, the supernal speech. So the outer dimension of Malchus is called the God's speech. Hamoker la'almin dizgalia. That's the source for the revealed worlds. Remember, there's revealed worlds and there's hidden worlds. So now you're starting to see, starting to talk about the difference in Dibur and Machshava. So God's speech, where you actually hear words where it says, Vayemer Hashem. It's a Vayemer Hashem Yehi Oyer. Vayehi Oyer. Vayemer Elikim, rather. Vayemer Elikim Yehi Oyer Vayehi Oyer. That speech is Chetzenis HaMalchus, and that creates the outer worlds that feel separate from God, the source. That's the Mokil Alman Dizgalia. And what's Machshav El Yena? If that's Dibur, what's Machshav El Yena? Hu Madreg El Yena Shebebchinis Helem. This is a higher level. He doesn't say that it's Pnimius Malchus, because he's going to say it's Binah, actually. So he says then there's a higher level. Shebebchinis Helem. Just like our thought, when you think, no one else, it's not revealed to another. So Machshava is a level of Helem, and that's the Mokir. Helem Legab Nevraim, the Alma Dizgalia, meaning concealed compared to the Nevraim of Alma Dizgalia. Often the example is that Alma Dizgalia is like creatures on earth, land animals, and fish or water animals are Alma Dizgalia because they're concealed under the water. But here we're talking Beruchnius. So they're concealed Legab Nevraim. V'harizem Mokir Bechinas Alma Dizgalia. So Machshava is the Mokir for Alma Dizgalia. So in our case, a human being, when we think, we don't create anything through thinking. Even though thought has impact, Machshava Mayelas, as the Friedrich Rebbe explains in Likutei Diburim, but by the Eibishter, every power that he has does something. So Machshava of the Eibishter, because it's a concealed energy, like it is with us, it creates the concealed worlds. Dibur, which is a revealed energy, recreates the revealed worlds. And that's like Gili La'atzmei, which is Machshava. Concealed. It's concealed to others, but not to yourself. Like thought. That means the Nevraim of that world don't feel like another. That's why fish in the sea don't eat shchita, because they're constantly aware of and are immersed in and submerged in their source. Dibur, on the other hand, creates something that senses itself as another. Well, b'derech klal, what is it in the spheres? The difference is hu b'chinas Binah or Malchus. Binah is Machshava, concealed, and Malchus, he said before, Chetzenius Malchus, is Dibur, revealed. The b'chinas Helem, because Binah is a level of concealment. V'nikra b'yemahu. If you remember, we talked earlier about who. V'imoka b'chinas alma distilman devleis galin. Page 1411. If you remember, he said the level of who. I'll go there. He said Binah is who neitles nafshecha, Binah, which is Binah the alma diskasia, Lashon Nister. Says b'yema who. V'hi moka b'chinas alman stimin devleis galin. That's the source for the hidden worlds that are not revealed. Or Malchus nikra ato. So who is Lashon Nister? When you say him, he, that means he's not present. When you say ato, you, it means Lashon Nechech, you're present. Moked alman dizgali. Presence means revelation. Who is from a distance, which is Binah, which creates something that is concealed. Clear? Any questions? Now further, via dua, and it's known, the ikar mokar ha'ishtalshelus, that the primary source of ishtalshelus, meaning the structure, the cosmic order of the structure of existence, hu b'chinas Binah, is the level of Binah. V'sham ikar ascholas hakelim. That's the place with the primary beginning of the formation of containers. Remember, containers are expressions. Containers contain the oir. We learned earlier that Chochma, higher than Binah, doesn't yet have containers. That's why it's only a flash of an idea. That doesn't have any expression, but it's not that Binah is b'chinas ikras chos l'chein nikra garmuhi. And that's why it's called garmuhi. Okay, garmuhi. So you have the expression like this: iyu v'chayu ichad, iyu v'garmuhi ichad. Now, this is an expression from Zohar. Alter Rebbe has a whole Siman Chof 20 in Nageres HaKedesh that he explains this Zohar. Tikkunei Zohar. Iyu, you are one. Iyu chayu ichad. You are one chayui. What's chayui? So chayui could be like chayis eir. Alter Rebbe teaches chayu eir, and garmuhi teaches kelim. You're one with your energy. You're one with your container, because God creates both the energy and the container. Remember, we learned before about expression. It's not just the energy, the idea, but it's also the containers to contain the idea. So he calls that garmuhi. That's the beginning of the kelim of that are formed in Binah. U'kameshin is bar le'il. As was explained earlier, I have to find where. That's a while, not so far back. I think, I'll find it. I'll let you know where that is. I believe, I remember it was by Shimu, I think. Okay. Just for the record, Chayui v'Garmui, the Arizal interprets Chayui Moichin and Garmui Midas. Just as an aside, that's not relevant here. Al Kain B'chlal, B'chinas Eisius Machshava v'Dibrahim B'chinas Eisius Murgashim. So that's why, in general, since both, even though Machshava is to yourself and it's concealed, and Dibur is revealed also to another, but in general, because it's the beginning of Kelim, even Binah, Machshava, that's why, in general, these letters of thought and speech are Eisius Murgashim. You can sense them, like we learned earlier. Dibur, for sure. When you hear someone speak, you sense the letters. Machshava, we learned the difference between Pnimius and Chitzenius in Binah, where one you sense and one you don't sense. But bottom line, they're all letters that are existent. And therefore, Eisius Murgashim. Raksha Machshava hi la'atzmei. The distinction is, however, that Machshava is a is you feel it only yourself. The Dibur el Azulas. And in speech, it's to another. This is so far, so far, we've paralleled Dibur and Machshava to Lamaila, Malchus, and Binah. Now he's going to move to Chochma. But again, I'll stop. I want to go slowly, make sure we're all on pace here, all the same speed. Any questions, any clarification, or it's good, we move on?
I just think that it's interesting that Ata is Oisius and Hu is Nelam, is not Oisius.
I'm not sure where you see the Oisius, not Oisius. He doesn't say that here. He says they both are Oisius, and they're both sensed.
Right, but one of them has Oisius Galoi, and which is Ata, and one of them is Oisius
like Dibur, like speech and thought. Yeah. Okay. Now we move to Chochma. Aval Chochma hi lamayla b'chinas hakelim. Chochma, like he said earlier, on the fourth line of the previous page, fifth line, he says, not tfisa b'klei meiche, same thing lamayla. Chochma lamayla b'chinas hakelim. It's higher than containers. The ikra b'chinas ha'er, because the primary force in Chochma is oir, is the concept, is the energy. U'lechein nikra b'shem chayuhi. That's why it's called chayuhi, not garmuhi. Energy. V'alkein ha'chochmi l'mayla memoka l'isavus. So we said before, Binah is the beginning of the creation. Chochma is higher than being a source for creation. It doesn't mean it's not connected. Obviously, Binah comes from Chochma. And Chulam b'Chochma Sisa. Everything originates from Chochma, but not directly. Chochma needs to go through Binah in order to create. Ukiyadua, the Chochma b'chinas moker rochik li'ishtalshlus. That's what he calls it now. Not that it's not a moker, it's a distant moker. So it's like removed. Because, as I said, for example, if someone comes up with an idea, let's talk about it in human terms. Come up with a concept, a flash of an idea. You can't build a company or build a business plan just on a chochma. You need chochma to be fleshed out in binah, so it becomes something that is more tangible that you can then develop and present to someone. Chochma remains elusive, so it's a moker rochik, he calls it, from a distance. And distance here obviously doesn't mean spatial difference. He means distance removed. It's more removed because it's not yet evolved into Binah. Even though, like I just said, the source of everything is Chochma, and Binah as well originates in Chochma. The savas, the actual creation, comes from Binah. So there we go. Everything you created with Chochma, but as Chochma manifests in Binah. To look into Zeir Bereshis 22a, I remember looking, I think the first time, we have to look it up what it says there. That probably explains this idea. Okay, so what do we have? That now there's the next level where you don't yet quite, like he said before, about you don't have Osius like it is in Binah, so the Osius are built in the Korin Klal. That's what he said earlier. Here he doesn't spell it out. He just says Chochma is higher than Kalim. So now we have covered Machshava, Dibur, Machshava, Malchus, Binah, and now we moved out to Chochma. But remember, we still have Rotzen, Tainug, and Etzem HaNefesh. And that's going to be Keser, and Keser itself, 2 levels, and then the Etzem higher than Keser. That's what he's going to continue now. But again, I pause now for any questions, or we can move. So now he says, V'yesh Asius, there are also channels of expression, Gam bebchinas ha-keser, also in the level of Keser. We're moving now into a level that's beyond the 10 imminent
What does
revealed
it mean,
faculty.
Kulon b'chochma osiso bevino? What does it mean?
I just translated that you created Chochma as it manifests through Binah.
But there's not such a minor.
What?
There's
So that's why he
such a
tells you to go look in Zoyar. He tells us to look in the Zoyar. The Zoyar obviously explains it that way. I didn't look in the Zoyar right now, but that's what I would suggest. I'll look it up later and I'll tell you what I find. Let me just see one thing. Give me a moment. I'm just looking something up. Yeah, in Zohar he says like this: Chochma hu ha'omer, ubina hu ha'oseh. So basically, Chochma is informing and creating through Binah. That's how he explains Kulam b'Chochma Sisa, the Binah. Okay. So he says now there's Oisius also in Keser. Rag the Kolos Oisius Elu Hein Lamaila Ma Oisius Vakelim Dishtalshlos. However, the general channels of expression in Keser are beyond and higher than the channels of expression and the containers of Ishtalshlos, meaning higher than Binah and Chochma as well. Shehein al derech moshel Oisius Haksav. He's giving an example. The Oisius in the Ishtalshlos is like written letters. V'chinas dover nesif. When you write with ink on parchment or on paper, the letters are in addition to the parchment. They're not made from the parchment itself. The kelim shebekeser and the kelim of Keser, however, are made from the very material. Heim bechinas Oisius hachkike. They're like engraved letters in the object itself. So when you engrave letters, let's say in a stone, in a tablet, or for that matter in any object, it's not you're putting ink on paper or on parchment, you're taking the object itself and carving letters from the very object. Is barely ill, as was discussed earlier. So it's only a mashal. It's explaining that the Oisius, essentially of Chochma and definitely lower Binah and so on, are an additional element of over the very energy itself. Whereas in Keser, it's made of the same material. We need to understand what that means, but let's just see first what he says. When you engrave letters in a stone, in a tablet, there are letters there that you can read. That's why there are actually worlds that are created from Keser. And yet it says Eisa, meaning it creates something. And Pella, wonder, is the level of Keser. And there are worlds, meaning higher than the revealed and concealed worlds that we spoke about before, with Dibra, Machshav, and Malchus, and Binah. Ukamoy, like he brings also in Ageres Akej Simon Chav from Zayar, Begulgalta Yasvin Plesed Elef Almin. In the Gulgalta, which is the skull, which is the level of Keser, Yasvin are reside 13,000 worlds. That's in Gulgalta. Alter Rebbe explained, well, he brings it also in Ageres Akej, as I said, 20. So what do you have here? We have now letters, forms of expression in Keser, but they're different because they are of the object itself. It's not two separate entities. Meaning, like when I express an idea, there's the idea and there's the letters I use to express it. Same thing when I write it down or speak it. In Keser, there's some type of seamlessness between the expression and the idea itself. Again, this needs explanation, but first let's read what he says, then we'll explain as much as need be. And he says, this is all in Keser. However, this is still the outer dimension of Keser. This is like Ratzin. That it's still at least some form of Makal Ishtalshus, higher than Chochma, which was a Makal Rachik, but still you can't say it's completely removed because the letters of Keser, of this outer dimension of Keser, will ultimately be the source that will ultimately lead to Ishtalshus. Except it's removed even more than Chochma. When you talk about the inner dimension of Keser, they can't even call it a Makar. Remember, we spoke about Ratzin. Ratzin is a Hamshacha. I want something, so even though I'm not there yet, but the very will is drawing me to something outside of me. I want a house. Tainug, remember, which is previous at Keser, we said that's just your inner contentment. It's aliyah v'helim. It's all within yourself. It's not an outer expression. So therefore, it's l'mayla. He says that's not even called a makar. pnimis hakeser. I think I'm going to stop here simply because I want to make sure we, digest what we learned here, because now he's going to go straight to Oisius, even higher than that, all the way into Etzem. So that we'll learn in the next class. But right now, what he's established is, 1 second, what he's established is that parallel to the dugma that we have of speech, our thought, Binah, then Chochma, then Chitzenis HaKeser and Primis HaKeser, we now also have Lamaila, which is Malchus, Binah, Chochma, Chitzenis HaKeser and Primis HaKeser. So he's not elaborating much in understanding it. He's just showing us this parallel. So when we contemplate, and we're going to talk about Ma'irich Be'echad on all these levels, we can retrace the roots of existence all the way to the letters of the God that God used to create existence, which in turn go back to the letters of thought, which in turn to the letters of Binah, to the letters of to expression of Chochma, all the way Chitzenis HaKeser, which is still some form of a makar, and to all the way Primis HaKeser, that's beyond being a makar altogether. And when he says beyond being a makar, it doesn't mean that it doesn't come from there. Obviously, God is the source of everything. However, it's not a source that you can relate to and say, this apple tree came from this seed. This child came from this parent. There's something commensurate between them. This level is so beyond existence, it's God himself saying, I want existence. But he's not created a stepping stone that we can say, okay, it's somewhat something in common with us. That's the lower level. So in the interface, this level is mostly on God's terms, as opposed to the other levels which relate more to our terms. It would be like the difference between the access you have of your teacher as he's speaking to you on your terms. Then you can understand the teacher even on his terms, but then there's levels of the teacher that are beyond us altogether. And that's still not the etzem. It's primis hakeser. Like atik, we said atik is hatoka, netak rather, removed. Tachtena shebamaitzil. Arich, the chenis hakeser is reish hanetzolim. It's already the head, the beginning of the netzolim. So it's just different levels. It's not just different levels of relationship. And this highest one is one that's completely, God is beyond it all.
But even though it's beyond it all, this is part of the memutza. It's beyond it all to us. But there is a isgalus, there is Oisius there also.
Yeah. Question is what role those Oisius have. So it's the role of expression of that same entity, but it's not relating to us. That's the key. When God speaks, he relates to us. Here he's not relating to us. No, not even indirectly. That's what means Ein Makar Klal.
It's like you said, without Atzilus, there would be no our world.
Yeah, but this is not Atzilus. We're talking now about Primis HaKeser.
Yeah, but this is the same idea.
It's not the same idea. No, it's not. Atzilus relates, like he said, Binah, Chochma. This is a place that is beyond. We talked about this at length earlier. This is about God revealing himself on his terms. Think of it like pure Seviv, if Seviv Klam, or even higher than Seviv.
Gilui Latzmusay, but it's a revealing. It has to be.
Not. It doesn't say. Where does you see the word Gilui Latzmusay? Latzmei. You don't see that.
But I'm asking you,
it's not.
Be Arich
without Atik?
Could be Arich without Atik? Of course not.
What does that mean? But that doesn't mean Atik relates to us. There can't be anything without Atzmus. One thing, there can't be anything without Atzmus, but Atzmus is completely built in Metzias Nimtza. We're talking here. So what do you need? Why do you need anything beyond Atik then? If Atik relates to us, why do you need Arich and Chochma and Binah and Machshava?
No, because Atik does not relate to us. But the way
that's the point. That's exactly the point. It does not relate to us.
Right, but there is the Oisius there also, because from Atik could be
those
Arich,
Oisius about our he doesn't explain what those Oisius are. We're going to learn about it more, but it's not the same as the lower levels, obviously. Here, the point is that it's not the same. You're trying to make it that it's like Arich. It's not Arich, it's Atik. Do you understand the difference between Atik and Arich?
Yeah, I didn't say it's the same. I said that
Well, what's the
that
difference? Explain the
that the
difference.
Pnimius is having his galus. To us, it's
He doesn't
nothing.
say that. Where does he say that he has his galus? He doesn't say that at all. He just says,
Basically,
ain't a mocker klal.
to
That's what he
our
says.
elements, but this it's a mocker, not mocker Yoshua, but without that,
No, he
our
already
element.
said it's not even a mocker rochik and not a mocker at all. That's ain't a, he says those words. Ain't a b'chinas mocker klal. You're qualifying something that he's not saying. Anyway, I would wait till we learn further and we'll understand it better. There's a reason for that, because we want God on God's terms, not God on our terms. That's part of the interface as well. So you need to have this level. But we'll talk about this more. I'm going to stop here. So around halfway down, page 1419. Are there any other questions?
It said that he created thousands of worlds. So I just sounds nice.
13,000, yeah. And the level of Golgotha, that's what he called Keser. Okay, so we'll stop here.